Is Cape independence still necessary? Hi, my name's Phil Craig. I'm a co-founder of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group and I'm leader of the Referendum Party. And in this video, I'm going to discuss the current political situation in South Africa and I'm going to answer the question, is Cape independence still necessary? Before I start, I'm going to ask that when you think about our political situation, you force yourself to observe one essential rule, and it's this. Please don't believe anything you're being told until you've checked the facts for yourself from a reliable, independent source. The South African political order is currently being turned on its head. Political parties smell blood in the water and they want power, and they'll tell you whatever they think you need to hear to get them to vote for them. So please don't allow yourself to end up being a pawn in somebody else's game. Now today, I'm going to make 5 statements which I believe are critically important to our future happiness and prosperity, and I'm going to provide supporting evidence so that you can check for yourself that what I'm saying is actually true. Number 1, there's a fundamental ideological divide running through the heart of South Africa. Ignore it at your peril. Number 2, coalition governments will not solve our problems. We have to change the system of government. Number 3, we have a legal right to self-determination. If we want a future here in South Africa, we need to exercise it. Number 4, Cape independence is the best solution for the people of the Western Cape and for everybody else in South Africa who shares our ideological views. And number 5, if you want Cape independence, then you're going to have to vote for Cape independence. And in this video, I'm going to pack out each of these statements separately. Number 1, there's a fundamental ideological divide running through the heart of South Africa. Ignore it at your peril. It's very easy to blame the ANC for all our current problems, but we must never lose sight of the fact that they didn't elect themselves. The only reason that the ANC have been able to destroy South Africa's economy, its infrastructure and its institutions is because for 31 years, the majority of South Africans have voted for them. And even now, they remain the most popular party in South Africa. Most of the people watching this video won't be able to imagine themselves voting for the ANC, and here in the Western Cape, the majority of us have never once done so. Many political commentators would have us believe that all South Africans want the same thing. But when it comes to the most important act of any democratic system, voting, then this patently isn't true. And we know it isn't true because we have the election results since 1994 to prove that it isn't true. Broadly speaking, 30% of South Africans vote to live in a harmonious, non-racial society which rejects socialist-styled economic policies and racial nationalism, and which promotes free enterprise and the rule of law. The other 70% habitually votes for political parties who endorse the continued use of race-based policies, state-owned enterprises and the weakening of property rights, and who facilitated corruption, actively undermined the law and progressively made it harder for businesses to operate in South Africa. And over the last 30 years, the 30% have gradually coalesced around the DA, whilst the 70% have predominantly voted for the ANC, or more recently, one of its 2 breakaway parties, the EFF and MK. Now, many political commentators would have us believe that a radical political realignment is underway. At a party level, this may be true, with ANC voters radicalising and increasingly voting for MK or EFF rather than the ANC. But at the ideological level, it's not. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to show you a slide of election results since 1994, which track how the majority of South Africans have actually voted. And here you can see that the 70% group, which we refer to as the African nationalists, have not changed their ideological views at all during the entire democratic era. In 1994, 63% of South African voters voted for the ANC, whilst in 2024, 64% voted either ANC, MK, or EFF. And at no point in the last 3 decades has this number ever dropped below 62%. And the key takeaway from the data is this. We may not know exactly how the 70% of South Africans who are African nationalists will distribute their votes between the various political parties who advance their chosen ideology. But what we can say with virtual certainty is that in 2029 and beyond, they'll continue to vote for African nationalism, and there'll be no radical shift towards non-racialism, free markets, and the rule of law. You should therefore be deeply suspicious of anyone who tries to convince you otherwise, and should ask them for the supporting data to back up any such claim, because I'll tell you now, there isn't any. My second statement is this. Coalition governments will not solve our problems. We have to change the system of government. This video is made for the 30% of South Africans who vote for business-friendly policies, which will allow us to grow our economy, create jobs, and to lift our people out of poverty, who want to end all race-based policies in South Africa, and who want the rule of law to be imposed without fear or favour. In the previous section of this video, we've established that 2/3 of South Africans are unwilling to vote for the policies we support, and that it's highly unlikely to change for the foreseeable future. In fact, it's very possible that our situation will get worse rather than better, as African nationalists switch their votes away from the ANC to more radical parties like MK, who literally want to tear up the constitution and to remove all of our constitutional rights. You don't need a degree in maths to recognise that with 30% of the vote, people who think like us are a permanent minority in South Africa. And this is potentially disastrous for us because South Africa operates as a unitary state. And by this, we mean a state where the majority elects a central government which has ultimate authority over everyone and virtually everything. In other words, as a minority, we'll never be governed the way we want to be governed. Instead, we'll always have the choices of the majority perpetually forced onto us against our will. In response, many seemingly well-intentioned people are now advancing the idea that a coalition government can somehow save us. But this doesn't hold up to even the most basic or factual scrutiny. If 70% of South Africans want radically different policies to the ones that we want, then how can a coalition of the 30% ever gain a majority and stop them? Coalition governments don't favour us, they favour our political opponents. And once again, you don't need to take my word for it, you should just look at the evidence. Going into the 2024 elections, the parties who represented our 30% promised to work together and remove the ANC from power. They formed the multi-party charter and they claimed that if we voted for them, then collectively they could get to 50% of the vote and remove the ANC from power. This was a textbook case of political propaganda. Not one party in the multi-party charter truly believed that it could get anywhere near 50%, but each thought that by promising that it could increase its share of the vote. At the time, we in the CIAG and RP vehemently argued that it wasn't even remotely possible. But who would believe us when the DA was spending hundreds of millions of rands to deceive people into believing that it was possible? But when the votes were counted, just as we'd predicted, the multi-party charter got 29% of the vote. However, having lost nearly a third of its votes to Jacob Zuma's MK, the ANC did fall below 50% and we ended up with a coalition government. The very solution that many would still like us to believe can save us. So we don't have to speculate what the result of a coalition government will be for South Africa because we already have a coalition government. The economy remains stagnant, unemployment has increased, expropriation without compensation has been signed into law, as has national health insurance, BEE has been strengthened, crime remains out of control, and the African nationalists are still very much in charge. In short, it's disaster as usual for South Africa. And as ideological minorities, we're once again having policies forced onto us that we didn't vote for and with which we vehemently disagree. Staggeringly, parties like the DA are still continuing with the same ruse. If they vote for us, they now say, we could be the biggest party in the next coalition government and everything will be different, as the biggest party will be able to dictate the terms of the next coalition. Once again, this is just dishonest propaganda. It won't be different at all. It will very much be more of the same. 70% of the electorate will still vote for African nationalism, and the DA will need to make a deal with the African nationalists to form a government. In this scenario, the DA will only have one realistic option, and that's to once again make a deal with the ANC, because the EFF want to nationalise everything, and the MK want to tear up the constitution. In contrast, the ANC can either make a deal with the DA, so long as the DA agrees to the ANC's terms, or it can make a deal with the EFF and MK. The DA says it remains in the current GNU despite the ANC's conduct and the government's performance, because if it leaves, the EFF and MK will come to power. But this will be exactly the same situation in 2029 and beyond. Why? Because 70% of South Africans vote for African nationalism. And if you still need more proof that coalition government isn't the solution, then the city of Johannesburg should provide you with your smoking gun. The ANC have been below 50% since 2016, and for a decade, the DA have had almost as many seats in the Johannesburg Council as the ANC. But instead of leading to radical improvements in Johannesburg, the very solution we're being told will save us nationally has led to the opposite. It's led to Johannesburg's destruction. And using the DA's own words, coalition government has rendered Joburg ungovernable. The only viable solution for us as an ideological minority group in South Africa is to establish a system of government where we can make our own decisions. It's not to remain part of a system where we're guaranteed to permanently lose. And the key to establishing such a system is our undeniable legal right to self-determination. My third statement is this: we have a legal right to self-determination, and if we want a future here in South Africa, we need to exercise it. Ideological minorities like us are trapped in South Africa's system of government, and nowhere is this more apparent than here in the Western Cape. The people of the Western Cape have never once been governed by the national government the majority of us voted for, and as I hope we've now demonstrated, this will not change for the foreseeable future. We didn't vote ourselves into the current system of government and all of the problems it's created, and we can't vote ourselves out of it to escape the disastrous consequences of the policies that we voted against. As the African nationalists mockingly point out, if you want to change the constitution, you'll need a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly. And they say this, of course, knowing that people who share our ideological views only make up 30% of the South African population. But like many other political commentators, the African nationalists have missed an extremely important legal principle which is already present in the South African Constitution: the unquestionable and inalienable right of all people to self-determination. The right of self-determination has been developed precisely to protect ideological, cultural, and linguistic minorities like us from domination by the national majority. It dictates that all people, including the Western Cape people, are free to pursue their economic and social development according to the policies that they've freely chosen for themselves. And what this means in practice is that minority groups like us do not, in fact, have to remain at the mercy of the national majority. We have another, far better option, which is to assert our legal right to self-determination. Now, a legal opinion written by the Western Cape Provincial Parliament states that the Western Cape people can assert their right to self-determination by bringing a motion in the Provincial Parliament where our 30% does have a majority and where a motion like this could be passed at will. And self-determination can then be exercised in many ways, including far greater provincial autonomy, the establishment of special cultural zones, or if justified, by secession and the establishment of a new independent state. The choice for ideological and other minority groups is therefore a very simple one. Either we remain trapped in a system where it's guaranteed that we'll always lose, or we assert our right to self-determination and begin to govern ourselves. What possible argument is there for not asserting this right? Even if you're someone who wishes to hold South Africa together, claiming the right to self-determination will allow us to negotiate the terms of our cooperation with other groups, including the national majority, to ensure that those terms are acceptable to us instead of, as at present, having them imposed onto us against our will. And self-determination should be the very definition of the term no-brainer. The fourth statement that I made is that Cape independence is the best solution for the people of the Western Cape and for everybody else in South Africa who shares our views. And in the previous sections of this video, we've demonstrated that there's an ideological divide running through the heart of South Africa, which has remained unchanged since 1994 and means that in South Africa, we're a permanent ideological minority. We've demonstrated that coalition governments will not lead to the implementation of the values and policies which we believe in. And to the contrary, they're likely to make things much worse. We've demonstrated that asserting our legal right to self-determination is the only realistic means to be governed the way that we want to be governed, and that once we've asserted it, it's a right which will allow us to make our own decisions. And we've established that self-determination can be exercised in a number of different ways, including increased autonomy, by creating special cultural zones, or by seceding, which in the Western Cape means Cape independence. But then why then is Cape independence a better solution than provincial autonomy? There are many reasons, but perhaps scope is the most obvious. If we just pursue provincial autonomy, the Western Cape may be able to negotiate a number of concessions, but final authority over the province will remain with the national government in Pretoria rather than with the government that we elect here in Cape Town. We've already seen the national government's determined resistance to the devolution of policing powers, despite openly admitting that they have no solution to the Western Cape's chronic crime problems. And we've seen similar resistance to the devolution of rail and control over ports, despite their well-recorded dysfunction. In any normal application of the right of self-determination, these concessions would be considered low-hanging fruit, not the end goal. And the ultimate objective of self-determination must be to fundamentally improve the lives of the Western Cape people. And to realistically achieve this, the Western Cape needs to take control of its own economic policy, to retain its own tax revenue, and to conduct its own foreign affairs. It's highly unlikely that the national government would agree to this level of regional autonomy. It would only be achieved through full independence. But even if by some miracle the national government were willing to make these concessions, there is one essential power which only Cape Independence can deliver, and that's control of our own borders. Migration and illegal settlements are rapidly changing the ideological composition of the Western Cape people. Unless the Western Cape people are able to establish an ideological homeland for themselves, where they can live according to their chosen values, then sooner rather than later, they'll find themselves not only an ideological minority in South Africa, but also an ideological minority in their home province of the Western Cape. Polling has repeatedly confirmed that a sizable majority of the Western Cape people know that Cape independence will markedly improve their lives. But what about people outside of the Western Cape? Well, for those people of all races who share the Western Cape's values and who also find themselves as ideological minorities in South Africa, Cape independence will also be highly advantageous. Cape independence will provide them with a haven to where they can legally migrate and where they too can live and be governed according to their chosen values. And Cape independence will also result in the formation of a powerful state which is able to project hard power into the region and which will provide an invaluable layer of protection to those who remain in South Africa and at the mercy of an increasingly volatile state. It may well be, just as it has been in many other countries, that increased provincial autonomy forms part of the journey towards full independence, but alone it will not provide the long-term solutions the Western Cape people so urgently require. Cape independence is the only viable long-term solution for the Western Cape people if they do not want the Western Cape to resemble the rest of South Africa within a generation. My fifth and final statement was this: if you want Cape independence, then you're going to have to vote for Cape independence. And in this final section of the video, I want to close a really important loop. We know from the many polls that have now been conducted that a large portion of the Western Cape people, and quite possibly a majority, favour the idea of Cape independence. Some are very vocal in their support. Many more are silent supporters. But the question we get asked more than all the others put together is Cape independence really possible? The answer is unequivocally yes. There is a clear legal path to independence, which is supported by relevant international examples and protocols. But in the final reckoning, the success or failure of Cape independence isn't dependent on what we as the CIAG or RP do, but what you as voters do. The bottom line is very simple. If we want Cape independence, then we're going to have to vote for Cape independence. We're not naive, and we understand what we're asking. Unless and until the DA's Western Cape Premier calls a referendum on Cape independence and allows the Western Cape people to make the decision for themselves, we're asking you to vote against the DA. Legally, the Premier and the Western Cape government are at the centre of Cape independence. Only the Premier can call the referendum, and if he does and the Western Cape people vote for Cape independence, then the Western Cape government will need to lead the negotiations which the law demands must follow. It's not fair that the Western Cape people are being forced to choose between voting for the DA and voting for Cape independence. But that's a choice which the DA have intentionally forced upon us, and it's a choice which we at the CIAG and the Referendum Party have done everything in our power to avoid. As Cape independence organisations, we will continue to build as much pressure as we can on our side. But all of our efforts will come to nothing if you don't do your part when it comes to elections. The DA have been very successful at neutralising Cape independence with fear and propaganda. They've managed to convince many Cape independence supporters that if they vote for Cape independence, that they'll somehow allow the ANC back into power in the Western Cape. This was never true, as election results have emphatically proved, and the DA have always known that it wasn't true. What the DA truly fear is losing their outright majority in the Western Cape, because if they do, they'll almost certainly be forced to call the referendum on Cape independence that they don't want to call. And our reality is this: if we vote for Cape independence, we can achieve Cape independence. And in doing so, we can create an ideological homeland for people who share our views, securing a long-term future for our people at Africa's southern tip. But if we allow the DA to continue to scare us into voting for them, then we're living on borrowed time. The national government will continue to be dominated by African nationalists, who will continue to act maliciously and against our best interests, whilst provincial migration will eventually establish African nationalism as the dominant ideology in the Western Cape, just as it has in the rest of South Africa. And at that point, the DA will lose power in the Western Cape anyway. We hope you've enjoyed this video and been challenged by the arguments that we've made. And in the final reckoning, our problems in South Africa will not be solved by talking, they'll be solved by doing. So if you like what you've heard, then please get involved and help us to turn talk of Cape independence into the reality of an independent Western Cape, the Cape of Good Hope. And we need people who are willing to volunteer some of their time to help us. We need people who are willing to support us financially so that we can continue to drive the Cape independence agenda. And perhaps most importantly of all, when it comes to election time, we need people to vote for Cape independence. To get involved, please visit our website, www.capeindependence.org, and in the top right-hand corner you'll find a Contact Us button, and you'll also find a Donate button. Thank you very much.